My name is Hadley and I am 27 years old. The voicemail arrived at 2:14 a.m., the kind of hour when nothing good ever announces itself, when the world is quiet enough for dread to feel loud. I didn't even listen to it right away. I saw my mother's name glowing on the screen and felt that familiar tightening in my chest, the reflexive brace for impact that had defined most of our conversations for years. When I finally pressed play, her voice was calm, almost rehearsed, which somehow made every word cut deeper. You're out. Don't come back. We're moving on without you. No hesitation, no emotion, just a verdict delivered like a weather report. I remember staring at the wall afterward. Not crying, not breathing properly either, just absorbing the strange finality of it. There is something uniquely destabilizing about realizing that someone who is supposed to be your permanent home has decided you are suddenly homeless. I replayed it twice, then a third time, as if repetition might reveal some hidden softness, some misinterpretation, but there was none. It was precise, deliberate, unmistakable. For a few minutes, I sat with the old instinct to plead, to defend myself, to chase after approval that had always been conditional. But exhaustion is a powerful clarifier. I was tired of negotiating for dignity, tired of apologizing for existing in ways that didn't fit the version of me they preferred. So instead of crafting a long emotional response, instead of begging to be reconsidered, I typed a single word. Okay. I texted it back and placed the phone face down on the table, a simple gesture that felt strangely ceremonial, like closing a door that had been slamming for years anyway. The silence that followed was not peaceful, but it was clean. And clarity, once it settles in, demands action. My parents had always believed I would remain predictable, that I would orbit their expectations indefinitely. But they had miscalculated one critical variable. I had learned things. Quietly, patiently, without drama, I had educated myself about the trust my grandmother established. The one everyone treated like a distant abstraction, a future asset discussed in vague tones and careful omissions. They assumed I would never question the structure, never examine the details, never realize the leverage it represented. But I had done exactly that. I knew the clauses, the triggers, the authority boundaries. I understood what could be paused, what could be challenged, what could be frozen. And more importantly, I understood timing. That night, after the voicemail, something shifted from hurt into resolve. I texted back, okay, so I moved on first? The sentence formed in my mind not as bitterness, but as strategy. While they slept comfortably inside the certainty of their decision, I opened my laptop and initiated a process that felt surreal in its simplicity. Trust locked. House deal canceled. No shouting, no confrontations, no dramatic declarations, just paperwork. And permissions executed with surgical precision. There is a peculiar power in acting without spectacle, in altering the landscape before anyone realizes the ground is moving. By dawn, the mechanisms were already in motion, quiet systems responding to quiet commands. I slept for 2 hours, not well, but enough to wake into the consequences. By the next morning, there were 46 missed calls and a message from their lawyer that read, "We have a serious problem." I stared at the screen for a long time, not out of confusion but disbelief at how quickly certainty collapses when it meets reality. The same people who had drawn such firm lines hours earlier were now scrambling against boundaries they never imagined I could enforce. I listened to the voicemail again, my mother's voice echoing with its cold assurance. And for the first time I heard something different beneath it. Not strength, but assumption. They had believed exile was a weapon only they possessed. They had believed consequences flowed in one direction. I laughed loudly and replied, not with cruelty, not even with anger, but with the steady calm of someone who had finally understood the rules of the game, being played around her for years. Because this was never about revenge or drama or theatrics. It was about agency, about discovering that the narrative you were assigned is not the only one available, about realizing that don't come back sounds very different when the door no longer belongs to the person saying it. And as my phone continued vibrating across the table, relentless, urgent, almost panicked, I knew something irreversible had begun. Not just for them, but for me. The message from their lawyer sat on my screen like a crack in glass, small but catastrophic in implication. We have a serious problem. Not we, I noticed. Not my daughter, not our family, just we. The sudden language of shared crisis from people who had hours earlier declared I no longer belonged. My phone kept lighting up, vibrating with a frantic energy that felt almost unreal after the cold. Finality of the voicemail. I didn't rush to answer. Urgency has a way of revealing who actually holds power, and for once it wasn't them. When I finally called back, the lawyer's voice carried the strained politeness of someone trying to sound composed while standing in a burning room. He spoke carefully, choosing each word like it might detonate. The trust disbursement had been halted. The property acquisition linked to projected funds could not proceed. The sellers had been notified. Contracts were collapsing. Financial assumptions were unraveling. In simple terms, trust locked. House deal canceled. The silence on the line afterward was thick, disbelieving. He asked if this was an error, a misunderstanding, a procedural anomaly. I told him no, calmly, clearly, intentionally. There is something deeply unsettling about calm when others expect panic. Within minutes, my mother called. Then my father, then both, alternating between anger and disbelief, their voices swinging wildly between accusation and desperation. The certainty from the voicemail had evaporated overnight. Replaced by a tone I had never heard from them before, the sound of people confronting a reality they did not anticipate. "Hadley, what did you do?" my mother demanded, but beneath the outrage was something sharper. Fear. Not for me. For the consequences. I listened without interrupting, absorbing the sudden inversion of roles. For years, conversations had been structured around my need to explain, defend, justify. Now they were the ones scrambling for footing, struggling to understand how the invisible scaffolding of their plans had disappeared. My father attempted authority first, invoking obligation, loyalty, family. But authority without leverage is just noise. When that failed, the tone shifted again, softer, almost pleading. They spoke of misunderstandings, of words said in frustration, of emotions running high. It was remarkable how quickly, "You're out. Don't come back. We're moving on without you," transformed into, "We need to talk." I did not raise my voice. I did not deliver speeches. I simply repeated the truth they had not bothered to consider. Decisions have consequences and finality cuts both ways. The trust mechanisms existed precisely to prevent unilateral exploitation, to ensure fairness, to protect beneficiaries from coercion disguised as family consensus. My grandmother, as it turned out, had understood dynamics I was only now fully grasping. The freeze was not sabotage. It was compliance with structure. The cancellation was not revenge. It was arithmetic. Still, outrage surged. My mother oscillated between blaming me and blaming the lawyer, between framing me as cruel and framing herself as wounded. But the facts were indifferent to emotion. The house deal depended on assumptions that were no longer valid. Financial gravity had asserted itself. By afternoon, the calls grew more frantic, then strangely conciliatory. Apologies emerged, hesitant, strategic, threaded with urgency. They spoke of reconciliation, of family unity, of starting over. Yet something fundamental had shifted inside me. Not anger, not triumph, clarity. For the first time, I could hear the difference between regret for harm and regret for consequence. Only one of those had ever been scarce. That evening, I sat alone with the quiet aftermath. My phone finally still, the storm of reactions exhausted into uneasy silence. I replayed the voicemail once more, not to relive the hurt, but to anchor myself in memory. "Don't come back." The words had been intended as exile, as control, as a line drawn from a position of assumed dominance. But power built on assumption is fragile. All it takes is one unexpected variable, knowledge. Preparation, resolve, and the entire architecture trembles. By the next morning, negotiations had replaced accusations. Urgency had replaced certainty, and the narrative they believed they controlled had rewritten itself without permission. I did not celebrate. There was no satisfaction in watching collapse, only a sober recognition of how quickly relationships reveal their true foundations when pressure is applied. Because this was never about punishing them. It was about refusing to be powerless inside my own life. It was about understanding that silence can be strength, that calm can be disruptive, that walking away is sometimes the most decisive act available. And if you've made it this far into my story, if you understand the quiet power of reclaiming agency and rewriting outcomes, then you already know why these stories matter.